Hello, I'm Sean Bernard. I'm the Creative Writing Program Director at the University of Laverne. Thanks everyone who's here now for joining us today. I'm very excited about this, as I've said, throughout this fall reading series. This is the third of our 4 fiction readings that we're having that began in October. And this is the first time, and one of the maybe the lone positive thing from this pandemic is that we've been able to join together in this reading series this year current students in the creative writing program with graduates from the creative writing program, and it's the first time we've been able to do that, and it's been a lovely experience. I mean, I hope you all like it. Whatever, I love it, and it's been fantastic. And today we have current student Sienna Ruiz is going to be reading, along with Tabitha Lawrence, who graduated a couple of years back. Just to let you know, the readers will be introducing one another today. After each reading, we'll have a Q&A. I like to have the authors begin the Q&A. We'll asking each other questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask questions either in the chat, or you can unmute yourselves and fire away. So otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy some fantastic literature. And I think Sienna, take it away.
Tabitha Lawrence graduated from the University of Laverne in 2016. She currently lives in Tucson, Arizona, and she finished her MFA in fiction this past summer from Rainier Writing Workshop. Tabitha is currently working on finishing a collection of short stories called This Is Not Intimacy, which she began at ULV. She spends her time waiting tables and hanging out with her cat, Catsby, and some of her biggest writing influences are Sally Rooney and Lucia Berlin.
Thank you, Sienna. I'm going to be reading a story called The Foxhole, which I wrote after my time at Laverne, but kind of based on the time I had at Laverne. It's a very unique culture at a very small school like Laverne. So it was something that stuck with me in my writing later. It's kind of a long piece though, so I'm gonna kind of skip through here and there, which may or may not affect the understanding of a story, but that's fine. The only thing that I know I for sure cut out that might be confusing is that the title, The Foxhole, refers to the house where the character Dorian lives. Anything unusual happened? Dorian asked. They were sitting in his room. The documentary show they started binging together before finals paused on the laptop while they scrolled quietly on their phones. They already didn't talk much anymore, didn't have to formally break up because they hadn't technically been together in the first place. It had been almost exactly a month since the last time she ended up there. Not really, she said, which maybe wasn't true, but the predictability of all the night's events made the small-scale scandals already feel like old news. And you're surprised by this? She considered. Their legs were tangled under the blankets as if by accident. He stretched distractedly against her thigh. She focused on navigating through photos posted from earlier in the night, double tapping those of the people she still liked and strategically scrolling past the rest. I am disheartened by it, she decided. Dorian looked at her, clearly waiting for her to continue. His hair stood up in odd tufts, his eyes melty. He looked sleepy. He had a disheveled energy about him that, when focused directly at her, could make her positively manic. Well, he said when she didn't go on, I'm happy to see you. She couldn't remember if he had ever so directly admitted such a thing. He frowned at his phone screen and then hers, comparing battery percentage before plugging hers into his charger. Such moments, which approached tenderness, seemed laden with a meaning so she couldn't decipher. They passed so nondescriptly that Beth had no choice but to agonize over them, replaying them in her head until the specifics of what actually happened, a touch, a sweet gesture, would be eclipsed by the significance she attached to it. In hindsight, she found it impossible to distinguish between different versions of the same moment, and so she would choose to remember it coldly, clinically, in a too late act of self-preservation. The truth was that anything more than basic human kindness on his part could knock her the fuck out. When they slept, they hardly touched until morning when the light made him stir and he pulled her close in his sleep, no doubt more instinct than anything else. He folded himself into shape around her, and with his breath warming her ear, she thought about his life, how it spread out before him, and the place where she could fit into it if they just figured out the right combination of words to make it click. It felt as it always had, like this breathless, impossible riddle. 6 months or so later, when it was all so far behind them that he could admit things without consequence, he would text her out of the blue. You were the one that got away, he'd say, all drunk and sentimental. It was all so cliche, completely unusable even for her fiction. She had still been unable to write a character who wasn't at least a little bit him. He'd say he still thought about the way they'd be 20 feet away from each other in the library with their own respective friends, and she, so desperate to be distracted, would keep looking over at him until he looked at her, and then smile and get back to work. 15-minute increments wasted just trying to make eye contact, will something into existence until at last they started to sit together, to spend the night together. It had been so tangible, he would say, undeniable. She could stay, she thought. He'd make her breakfast and give her a long, lingering hug when she left that she'd think about all day, and she'd keep ending up here until something interrupted their pattern and forced them apart. Only then would she finally have a definitive idea of where they stood in the first place. Or maybe she could have changed everything that very morning, any of those mornings, if she'd just kissed him awake, held his face, and said, "Listen, man, in or out." But the thoughts didn't change anything. Suddenly she had to go, or wanted to go, and to say goodbye she gave a quick, sloppy squeeze to his hand as she climbed over him. He flashed a look of almost urgency and squeezed her hand as it was already slipping out of his. This is the last time I'll see you, she thought. And maybe she was wrong, but it felt nice to try that thought out. She knew she's being dramatic, projecting even onto the way he slept. Later, she'd wished she'd allowed herself a more theatrical ending to this chapter of her life, but she let herself out of his house, turned back onto streets she would never drive on again. And then it was over. The spell was broken. She left. I'm skipping a little bit here. At 6 a.m., the people who left the library around midnight started to drift back in. Beth noticed these things because she didn't live on campus, so she often stayed the whole night just to avoid the drive home. She kept a toothbrush in her backpack, spare clothes in her car. Basic emotions became interchangeable the longer that she stayed awake. The fewer nights she commuted all the way home to her own bed. In this state, it wasn't uncommon to erupt into sobs completely unprovoked as she moved her car to and from overnight parking, changing into her work-study uniform or a slightly cleaner pair of leggings, a new shirt under the same sweatshirt. A community of sorts formed in the back of the library. There were others like her. Not a friendship necessarily, they rarely spoke, but a sort of camaraderie, a nod that said the pitiful determination in me recognizes the pitiful determination in you. She had been working hard all night, but she was wrapped up in a blanket watching Netflix across from Angie, who was sleeping sprawled out in the booth when Dorian came in. Her radar for him was powerful, as used to seeking him out as she was. How much of her precious, limited time had she spent in those days waiting for recognition, that lazy smile? Not this time. She hadn't seen him since the party on Thursday. She looked down into the work she'd been neglecting, making a show of looking busy. She couldn't even look at him, worried she'd be betrayed by the embarrassment burning in her face, but she could feel him there across the room. She fumed there quietly for a while until Angie woke up and went to class and Dorian crossed the room and sat across from her. I'm just realizing that I didn't mention the actually important thing I was supposed to say is that this story moves backwards in time. And that's clear when you're reading it because there are dates. But so each scene is it starts at the end of the relationship and kind of moves backwards. So that's important. Sorry. And Dorian crossed the room and sat across from her. Are you sure you even want to be seen together? She snapped, sounding desperate. People might get the wrong idea. You don't mean that, he told her, simple as that, and looked back down at his keyboard. It was rare to see him on campus this early. It could be that he knew he'd find her here, but she couldn't allow herself to believe that. She could slam her laptop shut and pack up her things, run off so Dorian would have to chase her down, apologize, beg her to stay. Even her imagination couldn't finish that daydream. Knew that if he didn't owe her an apology, that she'd made a fool of herself all on her own. He'd never been anything other than who he'd always been. If she walked away now, she might never see him like this again. He reached out, squeezed her hand. She was tired. She stayed. Beth met Tosh at Angie's dorm, and they all left from there for the spring break party. Once a semester or so, they would make it out to a socially important party, usually when one of them was pining after or spiraling from a boy. She didn't see Dorian, so they drank. They saw Myra, the girl Dorian had been sleeping with, and she was dancing with Tosh's not boyfriend Rich, so they drank again. By the time she found Dorian, she had finished her second adios, the quickest, cheapest way to get heart-melting drunk. She could see him before he saw her. He was sitting on the patio in jeans and a suit jacket, pomade in his hair and fancy shoes. He looked grown, so handsome that her stomach ached. She felt childish in her big Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops. She almost ran away, but he caught her eye and radiated happiness in her general direction. He was holding a beer and sitting near people, but alone. He patted the bench next to him, but she leaned carefully against the wall instead. Look who decided to show up, she said, slowly, as if that were akin to soberly. I just presented my thesis, he said, gesturing at his clothes like he was bashful of them. I actually thought you might come. I haven't seen you much lately. It was true she'd been crashing on her friend's floor, bringing her piles of books to Starbucks to study, to avoid the temptation of ending up anywhere else. I've been busy, she said. Well, you look great, he said. He was eyeing her legs, sticking out long and bare beneath the hem of the shirt. She sat down hard on the bench across from him. Thanks, she said flatly. But she didn't want to be grumpy anymore, didn't want him to have that power over her. The DJ started playing throwbacks. You want to dance with me? A truce. I don't dance. Of course you don't. You gonna dance with Myra? He just looked at her for a long, difficult moment. It was the first time she'd acknowledged what she knew, what she had no right to be angry about. She'd been promised nothing. Any expectations she had of him were of her own design, and she knew it was unfair to expect him to live up to them. Theirs was like all the comfort of a relationship, stripped of the things that make a relationship worthwhile. An affection only accessible when they were alone. He was waiting for her to quiet down, apologize, do something nice. Worse even, he probably felt bad for her for flattering herself. She turned to a boy at the next table and put a hand on his shoulder. How about you? Are you going to dance with me? The boy didn't hesitate. He pulled her onto the floor. She didn't look at Dorian. He was probably relieved someone took her off his hands. She knew she was being petulant, getting worked up over things she had no right to. Still, the blue liquor and lack of sleep made her feel untouchable. She allowed herself to be swept into the humid crowd that parted and closed behind them. The people around her were the ones she only saw at events like these. They would only know her as this, dancing to Hollaback Girl remix with a fraternity pledge who turned her around and said, "Can I make out with you?" so politely that she obliged. She had, after all, come there alone. And then the party was winding down, and she needed to find Tosh and Angie, but not before finding Dorian. He was on the patio still, looking completely composed. "You having fun now, champ?" he asked. He was animated and sweet, as in patronizing, coaxing her into a better mood. And actually she was. She had softened in the crowd. "Yes, I am, no thanks to you." She was laughing then, slurring a little. He steadied her with a hand on her hip to keep her from tottering. She could feel his skin through the flimsy fabric of her shirt. "It's nothing personal, babe. I just don't dance." "You did, though," she said. "You used to." He smiled, almost forlorn, like it was so long ago. "Yeah, I guess I did." She had sweat out her frustration from earlier, and for a second, it felt just like when no one was around. And that was fine, she thought. That could be enough for her. Their faces had grown close, trying to hear each other in the noise. He searched her face for something. He looked at her like he had to take her in, remember every inch of her for when she walked away. She leaned in to kiss him, and he let her, rigidly, before smoothing his hands down her arms and pushing her back. Her vision still swayed just enough that at first she interpreted this motion as him taking control, pulling her into him. The rejection hit her deftly, physically knocking her off balance, but he held her. He shrugged himself out of his coat and soothed her like a child. "I don't want your fucking jacket," she hissed. "Beth," he said gently. "What's wrong with me now?" What's wrong with me? She was loud now, shivering, fuming, causing a scene. He tried to quiet her, but the tirade continued. "Why do I keep doing this for you?" "Beth, you're drunk." "Oh, now he has morals," she said to no one. The lights were back on and the party was ending and people were staring. "When has that ever stopped you? Never, right? So it's me?" He kept saying, "I'm sorry," taking the blows until Angie appeared from nowhere. "Uber's here. She's got to go. Get home safe, Beth." Angie pulled her hard through the crowd, where the boy Beth had left on the dance floor was holding up a hysterical Tosh. He shepherded all of them into an Uber and urged the driver to get on with it. In another life, Beth thought the Uber would be taking them to the Foxhole. Tosh stopped sobbing when she saw Beth was angry, so she became angry too. Their not boyfriends could go home with whomever they liked, they decided loudly. "It's not like I'm trying to get him to fucking propose," Beth kept saying. Tosh nodded. She agreed. Rich called Tosh later to make sure she'd gotten home okay. And when she listened to the voicemail on the floor of Angie's dorm, she started to cry out of desperation, loneliness, drunken exhaustion. Moments before, they'd been crawling, climbing over each other, trying to inchworm their way to the dorm door. They'd suddenly realized how spectacularly hysterical it all was, that these unremarkable boys could make such a mess out of three smart girls. And once the laughter began, they couldn't stop themselves. The most clarity she'd had in the whole situation was then, tears streaming down their shrieking faces as they seeped like a spill into the horrible hallway carpeting, confident this was the most alive and incandescent they would ever be. It was becoming a thing. People had to be noticing. Another 9 a.m. in the library with Dorian after a night spent together. She was always uncomfortable with the thought she may exist to others when she wasn't around. Were they talking about her behind her back, laughing at her delusional, doe-eyed willingness to please? Or, more than likely, anybody who wondered didn't care. He'd invite her over late at night, and they'd hardly sleep, but they wouldn't do anything else either. And then in the morning, they'd be back at it in front of their laptops and books before class, and it all felt very warm and wholesome. If there were any speculation, no one would guess how wholesome it all was. They talked about politics and movies, and only in the wee hours of the morning themselves, and then back to the library when his friends arrived bringing gossip and distractions. They would share a glance as they put on their headphones and hid quietly back in their work. That's how it happened the first time she saw him leave with Myra. Even in these moments, surrounded by people, she found a tranquility in his presence, not in a zen way so much as a muscle-relaxant way. She could still feel him near her, and sometimes she would think of something she wanted to say to him, and right at the moment he'd sneak her a look, and she'd be certain he felt it too, that faint current between them. She felt it strongly that morning. Was it just the lack of sleep? The atmosphere of the library felt dreamlike. He disappeared and came back with 2 coffees and slid one down the table to her in front of all his friends, and it felt like such a public declaration that she was almost moved to tears. Then he started to pack up his things and said goodbye and walked off, up to a strikingly beautiful girl in track shorts. As soon as they were gone, his friends started buzzing about her, Myra. She was younger, a sophomore, but already had quite the reputation. Someone said, no wonder, that body. They said athleisure companies sent her free clothes so they could use her on their Instagram pages. They said she'd been spending lots of time at the Foxhole lately, and then one of them shushed, and Beth pretended not to notice as they glanced over at her. They lowered their voices to a whisper as they talked about the things they heard. She kept her headphones on, but paused the music, bracing herself for what she already knew she would overhear. It began with one of those moments that she'd realize later was exactly how she imagined her grown-up life as a child. Tosh dragged her to the bar down the street from the school for Rich's birthday. It was a large group, people coming and going from tables pushed together outside. Beth had just wanted to make an appearance. She had class in 30 minutes. She still didn't know Dorian very well, but they'd begun to talk a bit, message occasionally on Facebook, get thrust together in group settings, and so she considered the speed with which he found her at this gathering to be particularly encouraging. The patio was warm and loud, dappling sun backlighting the scene. She noticed the licoricey Jaeger and Monster on his breath. She noticed everything in those days. She stayed too long, and he applauded her for chugging her cocktail before finally leaving for class. She just laughed like none of this was at all unlike her, missing class and spending afternoons at the bar. Will you come back after? Dorian asked as she gathered her things. Will you still be here in, she checked the time, 70 minutes? Dorian motioned to the general frat boy commotion around him. Then yes, she said. And so she went 20 minutes late and smelling like booze to her classroom 2 blocks away, and when she arrived shyly back at the bar, she was greeted happily by these significantly drunker new semi-friends. Had that been why the feeling was so intoxicating, that syrupy acceptance? She sat by Tosh, but Dorian came straight for her. The Taco Tuesday crowd had arrived, and a band was set up on the patio. Why are you making me interact? She whined as he pulled her to her feet. I'm not, he said. I'm making a merengue. He said it so seriously that it had to be a joke, but she looked down at their feet, and actually, he really sort of was. He was holding her by the hands, leading, and then he slipped an arm around her waist and she leaned into him. Other couples joined him on the dance floor. Adolescent Beth would be pleased by this moment, she told him. He beamed. Would she? As a kid, you're really fed this image that all your romantic moments will revolve around song and dance. As soon as she said it, she felt silly, but Dorian was aglow. It felt strangely intimate to be so publicly caressed. The small crowd acted as a camouflage, emboldening them. They could have been the only ones there. He started to tell her about himself as a child, where his parents were from and all the places they'd lived. Israel, Germany, Mozambique. They moved around a lot, various military bases. He lived in more countries than she lived in cities. She noticed he made unusually long, easy eye contact as he told her these things. She resisted the urge to look away and felt herself pull into him. The persona that he put on that she wasn't quite sure he was buying. Would you move your family around like that? She asked, like when you have kids and stuff. He made a face. I don't know that I want a family. I'm not that much of a commitment type. She'd always come back to that moment, think to herself, he did warn you, didn't he? I feel like everything about me would have to change first, Admittedly, it was a bad sign that even as he was confessing it, she was thinking of ways she could prove him wrong. He went inside to order them more drinks, left her with a quick kiss on the mouth in front of everyone. It seemed to be the most promising thing that could have happened, a simple euphoria she'd keep chasing long after he was gone. That moments could come and go so easily, catch you off guard with their sudden splendor, felt miraculous. She accepted it as a gift nobody saw. Eventually, the group dwindled. She and Dorian had been alone in the corner patio talking all night, some kind of small talk barrier broken down between them where more meaningful things could pass through. She was certain she'd never met anything like him before. It was like coming face to face with a perfect character from a book somewhere. Without an audience, he was less sure of himself, less performative. He reached out for her hand, traced her palm with his fingers. They all paid their tabs and gathered their things. She expected them to disperse, but found the whole group was headed to the library. Dorian pulled a seat out for her at the round table where they convened, she and these boys who knew nothing about her. He wanted to hear about her stories, what she wrote about. I don't know, she fumbled, just people, moments. He begged to be read just one line, and she obliged. She asked about his work, and he explained his thesis to her with impressive understanding, some large-scale research for international business. Dorian shifted easily between immersing himself in work and chatting amicably. Beth admired that, revered it, because it seemed all she could do was find distractions. She was mesmerized, unable to stop herself from interrupting his work. Just as she started to focus, everyone got up to leave. They invited her back to the Foxhole, but she said no, she should probably keep working. She hadn't gotten much done, and she was still too drunk to drive home. The next evening, he'd find her in the library again and start the pattern, moments arriving between them only to disintegrate, their meetings never to be mentioned again, always leaving her wondering what next, what was left for them. Then he, too, would pack up his things and tell her goodnight, and she'd be alone, buzzing in the library with nothing left to do but work. There was always the next day, and the one after that, and the promise of someone to distract her, the feeling of eyes across the room waiting to lock with hers. Thank you. That was a little bit long, so sorry.
No, that was fantastic. Yeah, so everybody, you're welcome to use the reactions or the chat to show your praise after or during the readings. That was great, Tabitha. And now you get to introduce Sienna. I'll be quiet.
Wonderful. So next we have Sienna, who is right on the cusp of graduating. She'll be done this spring. It's very exciting. Her fiction, what little of it I've read so far, is very socially minded and surprising, and you can feel that it's weighted with a lot. Like, she has her mind on a lot of things as she writes it. I don't have a good way of saying that, but you can just feel that she's putting a lot of the very tense time she's writing into it, and you can feel it. It's very full of tactile descriptions, very raw emotions. In addition to that, she's hanging out with her dogs and buying matcha. And I know you already have her bio in front of you, but I think we can expect really great things from her, and I'm excited to see what comes next. So next we have Sienna. Take it away.
Thank you, Tabitha. I'm going to read 2 short stories. The first one is called Middle Years, and I'm going to start with that one. In an apartment complex in Rancho Cucamonga, a dried-up flower stretches its petals wide, trying to hug the sun. It won't make it to summer. To the left, the bodies of 3 boys lie in a ditch on the side of their apartment complex, resembling soldiers in combat. They've been friends since kindergarten. Sweat, dirt, and grime cover the boys' bodies. A couple have blood seeping out of fresh wounds. The sun is setting and the weekend is approaching. What do you guys want to do this weekend? Ricky asks the others. All the boys are catching their breaths from an hour-long rock battle fight. An extremely dangerous game played for the thrill. Ricky, a 13-year-old boy, is as wild as the California wildfires, sporadic and hard to contain. He's the troublemaker of their friend group. The teachers hate him because of all the chaos he causes in class. And so to get rid of him, they often send him to the principal's office. He's in the office more than he's in class. Let's make this weekend one to remember. This is our last week as middle schoolers, Eric says. Eric is a quiet kid. He's most talkative around his friends. When it comes down to getting in trouble, he's often overlooked because of his good grades and quiet demeanor. They get up and start shouting plans simultaneously. Let's egg the old lady's house who always rats on us to management, Mateo says. Mateo is a difficult person to read. He has a temper, but can also be kind. He never loses a fight and isn't one to forgive. Yeah, maybe then she'll stop bothering us, Eric shouts back in agreement. Let's ding-dong ditch people, Mateo says. What if we sneak into the pool and go night swimming, Eric asks. No, that's too boring, Mateo says back. Ricky, watching all the commotion take place, knew that his idea would top all of theirs. How about we break into school? As soon as Ricky says it, he knows the others are in. They all stop and look at him wide-eyed. So the planning begins. Ricky grabs a stick with a pointed edge, and as Mateo and Eric throw out ideas, he uses it to draw their plans in the dirt. By 10 p.m., they have a solid enough plan to keep them occupied until school Monday morning. They would spend the rest of the night and Saturday morning preparing. They split the supplies up evenly, making sure all were things they had in their homes. See you guys tomorrow, Ricky says. The 3 of them go separate ways and start on their way home. Their homes aren't far. They all live 1 building unit away from each other. As Ricky walks home, his stomach starts to growl. He hasn't eaten all day, and he knows that when he gets home, there won't be dinner either. Even if there was food, Ricky wasn't sure he'd be able to eat it. He feels bad. He hasn't told anyone he's going to flunk the 8th grade and have to repeat it. He hasn't even told his mom. She has enough going on with having to work an extra job after finally leaving the shitty marriage with Ricky's father. Ricky's glad his mom left his dad. His dad is an asshole. When he gets home, he's alone as usual. He checks the fridge for something to eat. The fridge might as well be empty, with half a carton of expired milk and tortillas being the only contents inside. But he's used to this. He settles for the tortillas and brings them into his room as he packs a bag to prepare for their night of adventure. Once I change my grades at school, I won't have to lie to anyone anymore, Ricky thinks as he shoves a couple rolls of toilet paper into his bag. The night starts by the 4 TPing and egging the building the old lady lives in. The whole building wasn't to blame, but there wasn't a way they could only target her house. The rest just have to suffer too. They were going to ding-dong ditch places throughout their apartment complex, targeting those who they disliked or had crushes on. This is going to take some time. Lastly, they would leave the apartment complex to break into their school and relax on the roof. Throughout the night, they shared many laughs. They also had a couple close calls of almost getting caught. When they tried to ding-dong ditch a girl from one of their classes, the dog jumped on the couch and started barking at them before they could even reach the doormat. By now, it was time to break into the school. As they approached the building, they realized that it looked different at night. All the lights inside and around the building were off. The only illumination came from the street lamps outside of the school. Once they reached the gate around their school, their pushing and shoving stopped and smiles wiped off their faces. "This is it," Mateo said. Ricky stepped forward and started climbing the fence. Once he got to the top, he looked down at the others. "You two coming or what?" Ricky asked. He hopped off of the fence and the other two followed behind him. "Well, what should we do now?" Eric asks once they all stepped onto the school property. "Let's just walk around campus and then hang out on the roof," Mateo didn't carry his usual hard demeanor. "It's our last week as middle schoolers." The three boys walked around sharing memories they had of their 2 years in middle school. "Eric, remember the time I dared you to lick the frog we were dissecting in bio class?" Mateo yelled out, trying to hold in his laughter. "Fuck, dude, that was so disgusting. It tasted so bitter." Eric said this with his nose scrunched up. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." Mateo and Ricky were laughing hard, their bodies crouched over as they tried to catch their breath. Eventually, they made it onto the roof of the school. The three boys started out onto the grass field of their campus. They could hear the sprinklers on, but couldn't see the blades of grass getting wet. "I can't believe this is our last week," Eric said, his throat thick. "I know," Mateo replied quickly. "Hey, we're all going to still have each other. The high school parties are going to be wild." Ricky cleared his throat and stood up on the roof. "Before you all get any more sentimental, I'll be right back. I gotta piss really bad." He quickly climbed down the ladder and walked back onto the school grounds. His hands started shaking. "I gotta do this," Ricky whispered to himself. The only reason why he threw out breaking into the school was to change his grades, so he didn't have to lie to his mom or friends anymore. He threw his hoodie over his head and walked towards his first period class. He grabbed his school ID card from his pocket and stuck it through the side of the door. Jiggling the door handle and ID card, he's finally able to unlock the door. As he steps inside, the lights in the classroom come on. He freezes in his step. "I forgot they're motion censored," he thinks to himself. Keeping his head low, he walks to the computer, moving the mouse to wake it up. He quickly finds the gradebook on the computer and scrolls to his name, changing his grade from an F to a C. Ricky does this for every class period he's failing. After he's done, he goes back to meet Eric and Mateo on the roof. "Ricky, finally, we were about to go looking for you. We think we should go home now. The sun's gonna come up soon," Eric said. A couple hours have passed, and Ricky, Eric, and Mateo are walking side by side into school. Their stomachs turn as they sit in their first period class. They're afraid they're going to get in trouble, but the first period goes by and nothing happens. As the day goes on, they're less nervous. By sixth period, they know they got away with breaking into the school. During sixth period, the 8th grade class gets to go onto their school's upper field and celebrate. Every day until graduation day, the school's planned for the kids to do fun activities. Ricky, Eric, and Mateo walk with the rest of the 8th grade graduating class to the back of their school, passing the same fence they hopped on Sunday night to break into the school. Ricky, Eric, Mateo stay behind for a moment, Mrs. Stefano says. The three freeze in their steps and look at one another from the corner of their eyes before turning around and walking back towards their teacher. A couple kids look back curious. "I'm sorry, boys," Mrs. Stefano says. "I got a call from the office. They need the three of you up there. Sounds important." She hands them each a slip of paper, hall passes, and walks with the rest of the kids toward the sound of music, a popcorn machine, air whooshing as it fills up a jumper. Once Mrs. Stefano is out of sight, Eric turns around and toward the others. "They know, we're caught. I'm going to get in trouble." "Fuck," he says. His eyes are slightly bulging out of his head. "Calm down, Eric. We didn't do anything wrong. At most, they're going to give us a quick scolding, and then we'll be back on our way eating pizza and popcorn in no time." Mateo steps around Eric and starts walking towards the office. Eric seems satisfied with this answer and follows Mateo. Ricky is scared shitless. He never told the others he changed his grades last night when he went to the restroom. It was his plan all along to change them, but he didn't think he'd get caught. He took every precaution possible. Mateo turns around. "You coming, Ricky, or what?" When they walk into the office, they're directed into the principal's office, and Ricky can see that Mateo and Eric are starting to look nervous. Ricky's body feels numb. He vaguely hears what's being said. The principal shows footage of three figures hopping over the side gate and breaking into the school. She tells him how they only knew who did it because someone hacked into the classrooms to change the grades in the classes they are failing, and dropped an ID card in the process. She holds up Ricky's ID and looks at him. At this, his best friends look at him, Mateo with clenched fists and Eric with a half-open mouth. She then turns to Mateo and Eric and tells them they're suspended, which means they can no longer walk in the 8th grade promotion with the rest of the class. At this, Eric's eyes begin to water and Mateo turns ready to throw a punch at Ricky. The principal puts her hand out, stopping him. Your parents are on their way, she tells them. She tells the three of them and escorts them out of her office. The three of them sit in chairs inside the front office. Eric is sobbing. Mateo is stone-faced. Ricky has tears rimming the corner of his eyes. The assistants at the front desk pretend to act oblivious to what's going on. Guys, I'm sorry, Ricky says, but the two boys ignore him. I didn't mean for us to get in trouble, he tries to tell them. I was failing all my classes. Things have been hard at home. I didn't want my mom to worry about me not graduating. Ricky starts to cry, but they still don't look at him. One by one, parents start to come to pick them up, already being informed over the phone about what's happened. Ricky's mom is the last to come. After the parents all fill out the paperwork, Eric and Mateo turn, brushing past Ricky's shoulder to leave. Guys, he tries one more time, but the two leave without glancing back at him. Ricky finally turns to look at his mom and sees the sorrow on her face. She looks away and walks out the door, and he follows. He wishes she'd yell at him. Her silence hurts more. So that's the first story. And then the second one is a little shorter. It's called The Collector, and it's a little strange too. Inside a clawfoot tub, a woman sits. The water curdles against her skin, the roots of her hair peeking gray. She's been in the bathtub for a while, her late 20s and all of her 30s spent soaking in the sludge. Her skin starting to melt away, dripping and oozing off. Chicken skin in a rotisserie oven. The collector has been watching the woman for a while, living in her downstairs closet, with the hands of a bird, upper body and head of a man, and lower body of a snake. He sits, head against the door, listening to the woman's breathing. Layers of shedded skin covering the floor like snow. The water sloshing in the tub like the ocean, he pleads for the animosity-filled waves to drag her head under the water. As he listens, he hears the woman upstairs sigh and slowly start to weep. The tears like hail pound the water, the first sound from her in years. At this, the collector opens the closet door and makes his way up the stairs, slowly gliding his body up. The skin he shed, sprinkling off, painting the floor. At the sound of the door downstairs closing, the woman stops crying. She lives alone. The house is usually silent. The collector enters the bathroom door, his thick torso getting stuck in the doorway. He uses his taloned fingers to pull himself in. The woman lowers herself further into the tub, trying to hide herself in the thick water. She closes her eyes tight, trying to wash the sight of the beast from her mind. I'm here to take you away, somewhere you can be free. His tongue licks her ear and the words snake their way in, the collector's voice cuckooing her brain. The woman remembers warm air, sun tinting her body, the feeling of grass tickling her toes. She thinks of the smell of chocolate, the euphoric feeling of being kissed for the first time, hearing birds sing. She feels the collector grasp her arm. Don't you want that again? He squeezes tighter. Outside, the autumn leaves brush against the window, whispering hello. A child is laughing while chasing a barking dog. She remembers being young, carefree. Her therapist tells her that time will come again. Still, she sits soaking. She opens her eyes to see the collector, its hand with talon-like fingers stretched out to her. And that's it.
That's fantastic. Great job, Sienna. Great job, Tabitha. And I mentioned this in the chat to everybody that we'll have a Q&A. First, I'd like to have the authors get a chance to ask each other questions before we open it up to everybody. But really, that was fantastic, both of you guys. I'm so proud and awestruck. So it's great to be in your presence and to hear you guys read your stories. Yeah. Great job. And just to be clear to everybody else, I teach these guys nothing. They have a natural talent, natural gift. They're amazing. All right. So I don't know. Yeah, whoever wants to go first, take it away.
I'll go first. My question is, the Foxhole is brilliantly filled with quiet moments, strong internal dialogue, and interesting structure. Where did the idea of these two character conflictions come from, or what was the inspiration behind writing a story with this type of relationship dynamic?
Thank you, first of all. I think I was talking about this at book club last time we got together. We were all women who went to Laverne, and we were talking about the very interesting dating dynamics at a really small school like that. And it's very like there's a lot of, at least in my experience, there's a lot of like uncertainty of like where you like whether or not you're actually even in a relationship in the first place to begin with. And so we were all kind of chatting about that. And that was something that had been on my mind post-graduation. Because once you're out of that bubble, you're like, oh, that was really weird, like how all of that functioned. And I actually was intending to write this. One of the scenes I cut out, they watch Eternal Sunshine together, which is maybe a little bit too on the nose, but that's where why I wanted to do it backwards like that, of starting with, well, this thing that never really formed anyway is over now, I guess. And it's not until you have that foresight that you really even feel like you can narrate on it. And then moving backwards to like remembering why it was something you could get so swept up in. And I just always really wanted to write a story about the Laverne Library because I spent a lot of time in it. And I was a commuter and I slept there a lot during dead week. And so it was just like a dynamic I really wanted to capture as far as like the culture of the school. So it just seemed like a fun way to go about it. And to respond to your comment earlier, Sean, I never went to your class drunk. So I'd love to take it back to you, Sienna. This is like sort of a comment question too. When I was reading both of those before, but then even more so hearing you read them, I was really struck in The Collector by, I read that one first, and it was very, very, it was just so gritty. Like you could just feel every part of it, and just like your details on skin and on like touch were really, really clear in that. And maybe because I read that one first, when I read Middle Years afterwards, it was just a really particular word choice, but something that struck me as you refer to the bodies of the boys. And it's such a small thing. It's not a spooky story, but just that one thing, like just instantly I read it and was like worried for them, like just with this one tiny word choice. And I just think that you're very particular and you can feel it when you read it, of like using exactly what you want to say for it. But as far as the structure for Middle Years and just kind of like the vibe it gave me, it almost felt like a Flannery O'Connor story where it starts off and you're like, oh, they're going to break into the school. Yeah, they're totally going to get caught, right? Like you feel it right away, but then you're like, well, maybe not. And that's very like Flannery O'Connor, where she'll put right in the beginning something that you're like, I feel like I know what's going to happen, but then you don't know it's going to happen the way it does. And then when it affects you differently, you're like pleasantly surprised. That's how I felt reading that, where it just like, you see that and you're like, oh, they're just going to like get into mischief. But then by the time it gets to it, it's just so heartbreaking because you have so much more of like Ricky's perspective. And even though it's a very short story, you still pack all of that in. And so I was just curious about like when you set out to write that, like, I'm curious of how it got to the layers that it got, like that it touched as you're reading it, because it starts off kind of, it seems almost like fake obvious, and then when you get to it, it's like it's got a lot going on. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about like getting to where it ended up.
Yeah. So at the time, we were like reading a book that was taking it was the second book I read in fiction. I don't remember the author's name, but we were reading about human interest type stories. And then there was also a story where they do refer to a specific city. So I kind of wanted to reference a city so people kind of, I don't know, if you like, we read a story about the Inland Empire. So since I live in it, it was interesting reading it and I felt kind of more connected to it. So I knew I wanted to add Rancho Cucamonga in it. And then since they were all kind of human interest stories, I wanted to write a story that I guess everyone's been in middle school and there's just kind of things that you can relate to. It's kind of nostalgic in a sense. So I kind of wanted to write a story showing how there can be like struggles within, like for a student there that you might not be able to like notice is like going on, I guess. And I'm also in a community service class right now at Laverne, and we talk a lot about how there's like students that are struggling that you might not be able to notice, or that there is like everyone has different backgrounds or different struggles that are students, and how we can properly like address those, I guess, in the class too, since it's a middle school, elementary school like group that we help. So I kind of just put everything that I was experiencing this like semester through school into like a story. I guess it's how it kind of came about.
Very cool. Does that mean you just wrote the story this semester?
Yeah.
I'm extra impressed.
Thank you.
I want to ask so many questions, but I'm not going to yet, at least. But yeah, I'd love to open this up to everybody. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can do it in the chat, or you can, like I said before, unmute yourselves and fire away. Let's get Tabitha and Sienna to answer all of our good queries.
Well, since no one else will ask, I'm going to, since Sienna just admitted that she wrote that story this semester, I'm wondering what it's like writing stories about the outside during the pandemic, or writing stories at all during the pandemic.
I think it's in a way more fun because you're kind of able to get out of your house for a minute. And so I kind of went more in detail of just things I remember being outside a lot more, or even in the middle school, because that middle school I did go to. So kind of just going back in my memory and escaping in the outside and the surroundings of it for a little bit kind of made it more easier and fun than if I were outside all the time, you know? Yeah. I don't know if that answers it, but yeah.
And then Sienna, you can see Moss's question in the chat.
Oh, for the collector, I wrote that one this semester too. In Angela's class, she wanted us to write about like a chimera. I don't know how to say that, chimera or chimera, which is like a creature that is different. Its body parts are different things. So I took that concept and kind of made it into, I guess, that story.
So you wrote those both this semester?
Yeah.
I'm blown away by that. Everything I turned in was trash. I'm like, all of these readings, I'm like, what are you doing to these kids now? How are they writing this so much better than we did?
Not true. Everybody always thinks that when they look back at their stories. Sienna, like I'm gonna go ahead and just jump in since I get to. I'm the moderator. There was a line toward the end of the collector that I thought was sort of staggeringly quiet and subtle. It was about her therapist. Mm-hmm. Can you like say that again? Because it's just like kind of snuck into the whole story, and I think it makes the story, it allows the story to be read like totally metaphorically while also being read literally. And I think, I don't know, like I really loved how quietly you snuck that in there. Could you say it one more time?
Okay. Like that little paragraph thing? Okay. Yeah. Outside, the autumn leaves brush against the window, whispering hello. A child is laughing while chasing a barking dog. She remembers being young, carefree. Her therapist tells her that time will come again. Still, she sits soaking.
Yeah, I mean, that adds such a whole other dimension, right? I mean, like the story, I don't know, that opens it up just, I think, beautifully. So I don't know, why did you decide to add that sentence?
Yeah. Like the concept of like the chimera in the story, the chimera, I don't know how to say it, but I felt that it would be a little bit too strange. And in a lot of my stories, I want to still have like relation to social things that are going on, so I know that right now, like being home, a lot of people are kind of like struggling. So I wanted to kind of add the chimera concept of this like fake mystical being with this idea that like of showing someone who's struggling, but not just like say that they're like struggling, just kind of show it through the imagery. And I just wanted to hint it a little bit so it didn't, that whole idea wasn't just like brushed under and not like realized or like forgotten, because there's so much other like imagery with the chimera and like their whole interaction, I guess.
You did mention briefly why you wrote it backwards, but I'm wondering if you could, I'm thinking the last 5 years, which is, it goes in and comes out, and it was a little, in some ways, difficult to understand because it was backwards until you told us that it was backwards. But nevertheless, could you elaborate more on why you decided to do that way? And because among other things, as you move backwards, people don't, the two characters, or actually the narrator, really wouldn't have not known what was happening at the end, and yet you already knew as you were going backwards.
I love the last 5 years. I'm glad you mentioned that. I wish I had seen that before I wrote this, it made it easier. But it does make it a sort of disjointed. You're right. And I wish I had like a better intention for this, but I did literally write this backwards because I was like, I kind of want to make this like Eternal Sunshine and move it backwards. Like just the scene where they're going backwards through things before it all disappears was really powerful to me. I don't know. And so that was really my only intention when I started it. But I ended up, it was kind of a cool construct for something that like, this is a boring story, you know, like it's like not a lot happens necessarily. It's sort of just really hyper focused on just like a couple moments of something that ultimately was kind of inconsequential to the character, right? Like she kind of even admits that. And that I think was part of like that tension of like, I shouldn't even care about this because I wanted to have a character that really knew through the whole time that like she was sort of wasting her time. And so I thought that by starting it off where the tension is kind of immediately put on the table that like, this isn't going to work, and putting it back the other way made it, it was kind of like I think I was just at the point where I had written too many stories that looked sort of the same and I wanted to shake it up. So I wrote the same story, but backwards basically. And it took a lot of like long drafting of putting too much into it backwards to really work, which was sort of weird. Like I felt like I needed to fill in the gaps more. And I actually think letting it be a little more disjointed made it work a little bit better because it's kind of, it had to kind of like flutter through, not actually give you everything that happened like in reverse chronological. So it was kind of a fun like exercise. It took a lot of tinkering, but it made it seem different. Like it just kind of took a normal thing to me that like I found more of it by putting it a different direction, if that makes sense. Thank you for asking.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up. So Al actually referred to the point of view, like to the narrator. I mean, it was a third person story, but I actually was wondering about the point of view, Tabitha. Like, it's such a, like, sometimes it felt like a very, very, very close third person, but also sometimes it felt like a very sort of distant, like, you're cute, kid, sort of, you know what I mean? Like I don't know, there's an interesting relationship between the narrative voice and like the distance and sort of, I don't know, familiarity and lack of familiarity sort of with the narrator. Was that just an organic thing, or was that like a conscious like choice to kind of negotiate the distance between the narrative voice and the point of view character?
I don't think that I like set out to do that, but I think sort of just in the process, a lot of the stories that I'm working on, I either started in undergrad or wrote in the first year of postgrad and or like first year of my graduate program. And so I wrote this in the first year and I rewrote it several times in that process. And so I feel like by the end, it ended up sort of like I had, you know, you have a little more distance the longer you like get from a story to where you can look at it and be like, eh. And I mean, it's just like when you're looking back on like things you did that seemed really important in the moment and you're like, what did you expect? Like I wanted that to be sort of in there. Obviously if it's like something with the setting is like, oh, like it started off a little autobiographical and then got like really different. But like I look back on a lot of that time and I just think like I knew in the middle of it that I was being stupid, but it didn't like, why didn't that like stop me, you know? And so I wanted to kind of like play with that when I was revising it and just be like, okay, well, I don't want to take out the stuff just because it's stupid. I want to like comment on it being stupid because it felt real, I guess. I don't know if that answered that.
Yeah, terrifically. I think that also goes to Al's question too, right? Like, I mean, like I like how you said that putting out right away that it's not going to amount to anything makes it about being stuck in that right situation where you know it doesn't amount to anything, like, and you can't help it. I don't know, like that very much, like, I don't know, communicates what the story is like essentially about. But yeah, other questions for Tabitha or Sienna?
I'm seeing a question from Parker. Where did you get the name the Foxhole? There was actually a disgusting fraternity house. It wasn't an actual fraternity house because those were not allowed at Laverne, but there's an actual house where frat boys lived when I went to Laverne that they called the Foxhole. And when you walked in, there was like this poster of a bunch of like half naked girls, and it said the Foxhole across all their butt cheeks. So that's a detail that's in there, but I cut that out for the reading. But then later I thought about it and I was like, that was kind of weird and literary that was a thing. So I threw it in there because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of stuff that happened at Laverne that felt too like stranger than fiction. Like I couldn't put that in there. I can't, that wouldn't happen, but like it did, you know? So I don't know. Fun fact. And as far as my stories, that is not a published story. I think Sienna just wrote hers. So I'm assuming there's not a place to read those just yet, but I'm sure there will be.
I would, I mean, I don't even know who the judge of the undergraduate contest is, but I think hopefully everybody who's a current undergrad at ULV who's here, you can remember there's a creative writing contest that we have each year, and Sienna, you should definitely be entering one of those stories into the contest. So maybe then it would be in like Prism, Parker, next year. So yeah. Other questions?
I'd like to ask a question for Sienna. That's okay. It's funny that you mentioned Rancho Cucamonga by name in your story, and it's crazy that you said you guys were reading something about the Inland Empire, because I always just feel like that's a place that like nobody knows about. But like when I picture a middle school, I picture my middle school, and like I picture CMS. I don't know where you went, but it's like, you know, so it's like you picture. It's weird to have like your home city be the actual city that they're writing about. And I think that that's a unique place too. Like I think there's a lot like regionally that like more than like Laverne itself is very weird and small, but like that whole area I think is very rich with like, there's a lot of like, what's the word? Like wealth disparity in that area. There's a lot of just really changing regions. Like I think it's a pretty rich thing to write about. Do you feel like you write of that area a lot?
I think I do, because I kind of write a lot about, well, I put a lot of little things in my writing about things that I've seen in the past or like experienced in the past. And of course, since I've only lived in the Inland Empire my whole life, I feel like I write a lot about it in like little aspects and hint at it a lot, or I try to. And I do think that, I mean, there's so many places in California, like no one needs to always write about like LA or San Francisco. And like the Inland Empire is so huge and there's so much culture in it. So I do think that I try to write more about it so people know that there's other places in California than those.
Sienna, what was the book you just read for fiction? I'm trying to remember because I know we had a quick conversation. Will you remind me?
It was Interpreter of Maladies.
Oh, right, the Jubilee here. That's right. Oh, yeah. You did a great job. Anyway, we're reading a bunch of different books in our fiction class, everybody. And so I forget who read one, but there was like a regional collection. I'm forgetting which one it was, but I think like nobody's written like the regional collection about Rancho. And I think Rancho is sort of like a nicely like, I don't know, liminal space. I know liminal is like a word that's used too much in readings, but it's, I don't know, between like downtown, between the beach, between the mountains. It is like economically like diverse in a complex and problematic way. So I think if you wanted to keep writing stories like set in Rancho, like that's definitely something that hasn't been kind of written about as much as I think it could be. That's sort of a fascinating place. But is The Collector also set in Rancho?
That one, no. That one's just in a random room, I guess.
That's good.
Well, as long as you brought up Rancho, it has, you know, such a long history too, and as a place, but the town itself, since it was a conglomeration of three other towns, adds another dimension that's kind of interesting historically that could be thrown into these stories.
Yeah, I've been thinking about writing about that. So I work at the library too, and so I work and do small things. So I did like a little project on the archives this past summer, and I was like, oh my gosh, I learned a lot about more about the Inland Empire than like I even knew. So I was playing with that, and I have like in my notes as a potential story to kind of write about, or like things to hint on, because there are a lot of interesting developments that have kind of like, the cities have changed so much in like the past, even like since I've been alive, I've seen so much been like built in like the cities, and I didn't know that it used to be like orchards and like like Altalamo is a packing house, like stuff like that is very interesting to me, and I do want to write more about, I guess, our area.
You might also be interested in knowing that Cucamonga is one of the few Tongva names that's still around. I mean, Cahuenga, Azusa, Cucamonga are three of the Tongva names that have come down to us.
That's really cool. I did not know that.
I think a lot of people labor under the misconception caused by a TV show from the early 2000s that Azusa is like A to Z USA. It's like a short, it's not actually a Tongvan word, but it's good to remember that it's actually a Tongvan word. Thank you, Al. Yeah, and I think we have time for one more question that I'm going to go ahead and ask, and I put it in the chat. So Tabitha, so you're a graduate of the creative writing program at ULV. You've got an MFA. Do you want to give any suggestions or advice? Now that you're visiting us from the beyond, any suggestions or advice to current students?
One thing is take the undergrad contest seriously. Because I don't want to say that I didn't, but I just didn't really like give myself time to write in those days. So I was just like, oh, I have to submit because Sean told me to submit. And I didn't really think about like, this is a really good opportunity. Like I should have submitted to this and taken it seriously. So that's part of it. And just, I think that the people that I went to undergrad with are still, like, we don't talk all the time, but I've made ties in this program that really make things doable sometimes that wouldn't be if I didn't have them. And so definitely, even though you're with these people for not the longest amount of time, like hold on to that, because we still have the group chat from when we were all in school, and it's just like that stuff matters, like having those connections. So I just say give yourself time to write and hold on to people that make you want to write, and then anything you want to do next will be easier.
That is fantastic advice. Well said, Tabitha. So Tabitha and Sienna, if you guys could just stick around for a minute, but everybody, if you want to just applaud, snap, thank them. This is a fantastic third reading of our series, and again we'll have a fourth one Sunday, January 24th at 2 p.m. with Christine Martin and John Abassi. So thank you all for being here. Great job, you guys.